New York is very fertile ground for terrorist intrigue.
The presence of the United Nations and the fact that New York City is a very cosmopolitan city means that there are obviously more targets here than most places in the world.
Beyond New York as an actual target, the city's melting pot environment makes it a logical meeting place for plotters and planners of global terrorism.
We had an incident in which a murder of an official in Africa was planned at the UN headquarters in New York.
There's further evidence of Cuban and PLO agents cutting deals here for troublemaking in Africa and Latin America. New York is also a haven for terrorists on the run.
A lot of Italian terrorists have come here for shelter, and there are several hundred of them known to be here.
This is a good place to hide?
Seems to be.
An example of footprints from an episode elsewhere leading here was the rescue last year of American General James Dozier, kidnapped and held for 42 days by the Red Brigades in Italy.
The story goes that Dominic Lambino, an Italian Mafia lawyer hiding out over in Brooklyn, was reached here through an underworld figure known only as the Fat Man. Lambino was then spirited back to Italy by CIA and Italian agents to convince a former client in prison there, a top Milan mafioso named Francino Rastelli, to help find Dozier. Through drug contacts on the outside, Rastelli then supposedly came up with the right address to find Dozier in Italy. Officials in the United States and here in Italy dismiss any significant mafia links to Dozier's rescue. If not fact, it certainly is elaborate fabrication. And informed observers familiar with the ways of Italy say the story is quite plausible.
The mafia would know where he was, where terrorists kept him.
Mafia insider Gaia Servadio and others are convinced of growing ties between the mafioso and the terrorist, inside the prisons and out, where the two groups' violence often looks increasingly similar. Funding for the weaponry of that violence, mafia managed drug trade.
Turkish arms mafia playing a major role as supplier of the heroin, and then directly linked with the Italian Mafia, which is directly linked with the American Mafia, so that it's very big.
In other words, the junkie on a New York street is in effect putting a machine gun in the hands of a bad guy someplace else.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All drug profits, it's linked to something awful in one way or the other. And certainly then terrorism is a very direct link.
A terrorist has to live by his own rules of conduct.
Dr. Ferracuti formerly headed domestic intelligence for the Italian government. He's delved deeply into the terrorist mindset, which made Italy the world stage for political violence through the 70s. The Red Brigade reign of terror capped by the Dozier episode and the assassination of former Premier Aldo Moro.
He cannot exceed the amount of terror that he's going to inflict. Otherwise, he will cause a negative reaction in the very population he wants to control.
In Dr. Ferracuti's view, the political terrorist has to believe that the fantasy of war is real, so he can kill without remorse. The finding of Aldo Moro's body here at this still-remembered site around the corner from the Rome Communist Party headquarters proved to be the beginning of the end for the Red Brigades. Their ultimate act of vengeance against the state amounted to their doing in, as the forces of the state closed in around them.
It was the maximum objective that they wanted to reach, and the results have been quite contrary to their expectation.
The results, according to Italian court President Carlo San Marco, were tough new anti-terrorist detention laws. Those laws allowing authorities to hold suspects without trial for up to 5 years. Judge San Marco has tried many Red Brigade cases, and despite liberal protests, he and others are convinced the laws work. In return for less time in jail, the terrorists repent, inform, talk.
The laws have been effective because they have allowed the defeat of political terrorism.
Politicamente ha perso. La prima cosa che uno si accorge.
We've all lost. Terrorism, an armed struggle, isn't the right weapon for changing this society.
Patrizio Pesci, a Red Brigade terrorist for 6 years, directly involved in 8 killings. He repented after capture, but as an informer was sentenced to death by the Red Brigades, who actually executed his younger brother in 1981 in an attempt to stop Pesci from talking.
I don't think that they're capable of realizing what they've done.
Through a translator at a hidden location in Italy we arrange for a payment to Pesci, he offers fascinating insight into terrorist psychology. He typifies the intelligent, educated youth who's converted into a killer by idealism, constantly justifying acts in political, not human terms.
Didn't make our value judgments from the moral point of view. or from the human point of view. We tried to put that kind of viewpoint aside.
He rarely came face to face with a victim, but once, holding a gun on a factory director in Turin, he saw the man's baby girl, and the more they talked, the mission became more difficult.
Io in particolare sentivo
I could feel the difference between this and the other attacks. The guy realized that we were going to shoot him. He turns to me and said, "No," he said, don't shoot my legs. It made me feel very uncomfortable. But, we still had to carry on with the action. What else could we do? My conscience is clean, you know what I mean? I've made a mistake. Certainly I have my torments, but I also have my moments of joy. Maybe I sometimes wake up at night because I remember something unpleasant. But there are also nights when I sleep well. If I had that kind of torments, I'd put a gun to my head.
The day-to-day inner conflicts of ex-terrorist Pesci are given larger perspective by terrorist expert Ferracuti when he's asked for a real definition for terrorism.
Do you recognize this statement?
All men recognize the right of revolution, that is, the right to refuse allegiance to and to resist the government when its tyranny or its inefficiency are great and undeniable. Henry David Thoreau.
You have to draw a very fine line between dissent and terrorism. If you win, you become a patriot and a hero. If you lose, you're a terrorist.
When a combination of police and politics maybe succeeds in restraining or pushing back a terrorist group in one area by one means or another, you see it emerging in another area.
Claire Sterling has lived in Italy for 30 years and written much about terrorism. Her 1981 book, The Terror Network, was the first serious study to demonstrate the international scope of terrorism. Soviet-supplied arms coming from the Mideast through Italy to other terrorists. Her conspiracy theories, once scorned, are now widely recognized.
Official knowledge has now confirmed in good part, and in some ways gone well beyond what I said myself.
A new Sterling book due in January will reveal more about the earlier denied Soviet links to the plot to assassinate Pope John Paul II. The hands really behind the gun, held by assassin Mehmet Ali Aja. The conspiracy theories over what really happened that May afternoon here in St. Peter's Square will probably never be completely sorted out. But it is clear Aja was no random killer. The evidence proves he was a true 20th century terrorist on somebody's payroll. It is known for certain that Aja trained at a PLO camp in Lebanon, one of 10,000 from 28 countries that passed through the giant terrorist training operation there, uncovered by the Israeli invasion. Soviet financing through the Syrians, other financing and support allegedly coming from Palestinian groups in the United States, including the New York area.
Major fundraising operations take place that the money goes back to the PLO and other groups.
Would you say that would run into considerable dollars?
That's probably in the millions also.
Those millions of dollars and rubles now funding a network that's scattered but still escalating its effect. Those never-to-be-forgotten images of what one crazed terrorist can do in the guise of some distorted cause. The religious fervor, emotion, and focused idealism of the Beirut madness is seen in other terrorist episodes closer to home. A brand of mutual craziness that bonds the terrorist factions together. We'll explore that next on International Terrorism, The New York Connection.